Between March 1852 and October 1853, 7 young men from Boston's most distinguished families died in what the coroner politely labeled as unfortunate accidents. Their falls, drownings, and sudden illnesses were written off as chance tragedies in a city where death was never far from the cobblestones. What no one connected, or perhaps dared not to, was that each of these men had signed a peculiar contract with Margaret Lawrence, the wealthiest widow on Beacon Hill, precisely 9 months before their deaths. The contract promised them $3,000, a staggering sum at the time, in exchange for services too indecent for Boston's polite society to mention aloud. It was only when Dr. Samuel Witt, a young physician fresh from Harvard, began tending to patients in the neighborhood surrounding the Lawrence mansion that the sinister pattern began to surface. Servants whispered strange things, that the 3rd floor of the Lawrence estate was locked off, that pregnant women were kept inside as if in confinement, and that the widow maintained meticulous ledgers filled with dates, names, and measurements. The Lawrence mansion was a towering red brick edifice on Mount Vernon Street, its iron gates and stately elms casting long shadows over passers-by. Margaret herself was a striking woman of 43, tall, severe, with calculating gray eyes. Born in Prussia as Margaret von Haussmann, she had come to Boston in 1827, the daughter of a professor steeped in strange European theories of heredity and selective breeding. Her husband, Thomas Lawrence, a wealthy textile magnate, had died suddenly in 1851, tumbling down the grand staircase during a dinner attended by judges, politicians, and Boston's mayor. His death, like so many others connected to Margaret, was quickly ruled an accident. Widowed, Margaret seemed less grief-stricken than determined, free at last to pursue a vision that had simmered in her mind for decades. Margaret's belief was simple, but monstrous. Humanity could be perfected through selective breeding, just as farmers bred stronger livestock. Her daughters, Catherine, Elizabeth, and Anne, were to be the vessels for this experiment. Margaret handpicked young men from Boston's oldest families, men with spotless genealogies and long-lived ancestors, and lured them with wealth. They signed her contracts, submitted to her terms, and disappeared into the locked halls of her mansion. The daughters, pale and ghost-like, obeyed their mother without resistance. They bore children conceived under Margaret's watchful eye. Every detail, their weights, their features, their reflexes, was recorded in leather-bound ledgers. Those infants, who failed to meet Margaret's ruthless standards, were quietly removed. Their tiny remains, preserved in jars of alcohol, lined the shelves of her hidden laboratory. And the fathers? Once their purpose was fulfilled, each was disposed of, crushed under wagon wheels, fallen from rooftops, or found lifeless under suspicious circumstances. Always accidents. Always neatly explained. Dr. Witt's suspicions grew after a servant confided in him about rooms no one ever sees, and a daughter glimpsed wandering the halls, heavy with child, her eyes vacant and lifeless. His medical curiosity soon turned to horror as he pieced together the truth. Death certificates revealed bruises, needle marks, and details that did not align with the official verdicts. When a desperate young maid named Sophia Prescott came to him weeping that her newborn had been taken from her by Margaret, declared defective, and vanished without a trace, Witt could know. He gained access to the mansion's forbidden 3rd floor under the guise of treating and Lawrence for fever. What he found confirmed his darkest fears, ledgers coldly noting the disposal of Jonathan Lell, William Elbridge, and Henry Cunningham, the very men society mourned. In another ledger, the babies were listed not by name, but as subjects, A1, B1, C1. One page chilled him to the bone. Subject E1, persistent respiratory weakness, unsuitable. Removed April 3, 1854. Margaret's influence ran deep. Judges, coroners, and city officials shielded her, men bound to her through wealth, and a secret society devoted to human advancement. They had dismissed deaths, altered reports, and silenced questions, all for the sake of her grotesque vision. When Wick confronted her at last, Margaret did not deny it. With chilling calm, she compared her work to that of any farmer. Every gardener removes weak seedlings. Why should humans be exempt from natural law? Worse still, her daughters, once victims, had begun to believe her. Catherine, knife in hand, defended her mother's purpose, insisting that the culling of weak infants was an act of reason, not cruelty. The line between prisoner and accomplice had blurred beyond recognition. Wood narrowly escaped the mansion with stolen evidence, pursued by servants, and betrayed by the very family he sought to save. He turned to allies, a lawyer named Fletcher, and Captain Barnes of the Massachusetts State Police. Together they planned to expose Margaret and her powerful conspirators. But before they could act, the Lawrence mansion went up in flames. The fire raged through the night, consuming ledgers, specimens, and witnesses alike. Margaret, her surviving daughters, and the infants were declared dead in the blaze, yet the recovered remains did not match the number of supposed victims. A carriage had been seen leaving the estate hours before the fire. Rumors swirled. Some said Margaret had perished with her house. Others whispered she had escaped across the Atlantic, resuming her work in Europe under another name. Trials followed in Boston. Corrupt coroners, judges, and members of the secret society faced exposure and prison. Newspapers blazed with lurid accounts, though many details were kept hidden to protect Boston's reputation. But Margaret Lawrence herself was never brought to justice. A letter postmarked from Hamburg, and signed yet unmistakably hers, reached Dr. Witt in 1855. You believe you have won, but you have merely delayed the inevitable. The experiment continues. History will remember me as a pioneer, and you as the man who tried to hold back progress. Margaret Lawrence vanished into history, her ultimate fate unknown. Some say she died abroad. Others believe she returned under a new name, her work continuing in shadow. The 3 surviving children of her experiment lived ordinary lives, never knowing the darkness that brought them into the world. Yet her legacy lingered, not in her bloodline, but in the ideas she championed. The twisted notion that humanity could be perfected through selective breeding would resurface in decades to come, with consequences more terrible than she herself could have imagined. And so the ruins of the Lawrence mansion stood as a grim reminder that the greatest horrors are not always supernatural, but human. They are born from ambition without morality, intellect without compassion, and a vision so ruthless it consumes everything in its path.